Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's NSP webinar, Update on Program Income Transfer Procedures. My name is Sandy Patel. I am with TDA, a technical assistance provider for HUD. I will be serving as your host today. I'm going to run through some technical instructions on how to ask questions and things like that before I hand it off to our wonderful presenters. Today's webinar audio is broadcasted through your computer speakers. You may choose to dial in if you're unable to use the computer audio. If you choose to dial in, please mute your computer audio to avoid hearing echo. Please close the email and all other programs on your computer and silence your cell phone, and give your undivided attention to our presenters today. If you have any technical problems, you can email Ernie Hernandez at ehernandez@tdainc.org, or you can send a chat message to the host. That will come directly to me, and I can help you with any issues you might be having. All participants will be muted during the webinar. Questions can be asked in writing using the Q&A tool. You can ask written questions at any point during the presentation. The panelists will collect those and answer them when we stop for questions. To ask a written question, use the Q&A tool. It is located on the right-hand side of the WebEx screen. You can see a screenshot of what it looks like up on the screen. If you do not see it, click on the triangle and it will expand the box. Please ask questions to all panelists. Then just type your question in the box and click send. Again, those you can do at any point during the presentation. All questions will be answered verbally. We may not be able to get to all questions, but we will try to answer the common ones first. Please send additional unanswered and private questions to Jennifer Alpha at jalpha@tdainc.org. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer with TDA.
Thanks, Sandy. Welcome, everyone, to today's edition of the NSP webinars. This webinar will be focused on providing further detail on the NSP program income transfer procedures, including how to complete the request template that you'll send to HUD in order to request approval to transfer program income. Just a reminder that the full instructions for requesting program income transfers are available on the HUD Resource Exchange. In addition to that, we did provide a webinar on July 19th that covered all steps involved in program income transfers, so you might want to take a look at that if you need a refresher. This session is being recorded, and an archive will be created on the HUD Resource Exchange as well. The archive will include the audio-visual recording, a PDF with the presentation slides, and a written transcript. I want to also let you know that if you need the slides for today's presentation, you can access those on the HUD Resource Exchange as well, or in the link that's provided in the chat box on WebEx. So I'd like to introduce you all to our hosts for today's call. From HUD, we have Jesse Hanforth-Combs, John Laswick, Ebony Madian, and Jerry Santana, and Larry Reyes. And with TDA, you have myself, Ernie Hernandez, and Sandy Patel. As I mentioned today, this webinar is going to focus primarily on program income transfer procedures. We're going to talk a bit about the advantages and disadvantages of transferring program income, so that if you're still considering whether this is the right route for you, these tips may help. We'll go over some of the basics related to program income transfers, particularly who can transfer program income, and then just a recap of the full program income steps before we get into more detailed discussion of how you actually complete the request template and how you might use some DRGR reports to help you complete that template as well. After that, we'll hit on some frequently asked questions, but then we'll open it up to a general Q&A so that you can ask all your NSP-related questions as well as specific questions on the things we presented today. And with that, I will turn it over to John to help walk us through the advantages and disadvantages of program income transfer.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. We're coming to you from your nation's melting capital, where we're on our 4th day in a row over 100 degrees. So I know that's child's play for you in Phoenix, but it's pretty hot for us here.
Yeah, but they don't get the humidity.
They don't get the humidity. I know, but anyway, so we may be a little melty-brained at times, but hopefully we'll be able to get you through this. So, we've been talking for the last few weeks about ways to get the closeout, and one of the big ways is to, if you have funds left in your line of credit, to get rid of your program income and transfer that over to the CDBG program. And so one of the things we want to kind of walk through today is some of the ideas that we've been having about what are the pluses and minuses of that, and there's really no right answer, and there's no sort of gun at the end of the track either. So there's really kind of no wrong answer, but there's just better answers and maybe worse answers. So the first principle is that you're not required to transfer program income. You can have an NSP program that completes all its activities, spends all its line of credit, meets a national objective, and has program income maybe for another 3, 4, 5 or more years, and operates as an NSP program, and that's perfectly okay. We like you to close it quickly, but you can keep running it as an NSP program, as an adjunct to your CDBG program. You could take several transfers over a period of years if that makes more sense to you. There are, I know, communities that are working on multiple sources of funds for larger projects, and you're not really sure exactly what you'll need when you'll need it, and so you have some flexibility there. There is no expenditure deadline at this point. You've all met your expenditure deadlines as far as the requirements go. There's no there are still funds in lines of credit, and there are still pretty large amounts of program income in some places that need to be spent, but there is no outside limit on when that has to happen. It's a one-way street, though. Once you decide to transfer money from your NSP fund to CDBG, you can't transfer it back. So you want to be careful about being sure that's what you want to do. And then as those funds transfer, they take on CDBG requirements, and they lose all their NSP requirements, which is maybe not such a bad thing. I mean, you're basically trading off. So no longer would you have the 25% set aside, but then you would have a lower set of income limits, for example. So there's they become CDBG funds when you transfer them. Next slide, please. All right, so these are some of the advantages we see that, as I mentioned, we want you to be able to spend your line of credit funds and close your grant out, and this is transferring these funds is one way to do that. And this allows you to close out your NSP grant. You would basically have to transfer all of your program income from NSP in order to clear the decks to get at that program income, unless you to get at that line of credit, unless you have just a little bit of program income that you're going to spend on something. So you buy into a wider range of eligible activities with CDBG as your source of funds. It fits maybe more seamlessly with your regular block grant program. I think okay, thanks. The larger principal amount of program income in your CDBG account means that you have a larger amount of public services and admin that you can fit into the caps. Although with the new accounting rules that we've been working with, there is currently a requirement that you spend all the planning and admin on program income in the year that the program income was receipted into your CDBG program. So, you know, a lot of these things have timing implications, but even with a full year, that might be difficult if you're transferring a lot of money. I mean, you don't lose the money, but you lose the ability to spend it on planning and admin. And then, you know, so it really is kind of an ideal scenario if you've got a CDBG project that maybe needs a little boost in funding, and you know you can put that in there from your NSP, then you put it right into something that you could spend it on quickly. That's the ideal. Doesn't always happen that way. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are disadvantages, and one of them, actually a couple of them, kind of revolve around what the effect is on your CDBG program. So here we have to think about the, you know, carrying more than 1.5 times your annual grant amount at a date 60 days prior to the end of your program year, otherwise known as the timeliness test. But this will bump up your balance, and it could push you over 1.5. So we'll talk about some ways to mitigate that, but it's just something to be aware of. We will be able to work with you on that, but we still will need to see you getting through it pretty quickly. The other thing is you are giving up. I mean, while you get a wider range of eligible activities, you lose the ability to serve people above 80% of median income, for example. And a lot of folks who are trying to do mixed income projects, you know, value that. You're giving up new construction. You're giving up the ability to do land banks. Those are kind of the three big ones. But if those are important to you, then you might want to hold on to and you know, keep at least some of that program income for those purposes. And then this says it may result in a substantial amendment to your CDBG program. I would guess that it probably will result in a CDBG substantial amendment. It's hard to imagine, you know, a small enough amount of funds or an amount of funds that are, you know, that fit exactly into the activities that you're doing that wouldn't trigger that. But that's not the end of the world, but it's just something to think about. All right, the next slide, please. Okay, so as a result of that, you want to think about timing the transfer. And if you do that properly, you can kind of come in at the beginning of your program year instead of towards the end of it when that timeliness test is taken, and you know, at least minimize the issues that you might have with meeting the timeliness test. Like I said, we can work with you on this. We will work with you on this. We understand that you're not going to be able to spend it all right away, but we've had really, I think, an increasing number of communities that are not making that timeliness test every year, and you know, we're really not interested in pushing that any higher.
But if we know that some of you will transfer enough money to set off your timeliness test, and what we really are encouraging, we're adjusting our guidance right now, and we're talking to the field staff, is that the best grantees are going to say, look, I'm moving over $1 million in program income into the CDBG program. I have to do an amendment, and here's my plan for accelerating through and getting it done. So maybe you fail your timeliness test the first year, technically, if we count the NSP program income that's now CDBG program income, but you have a plan already, you're working your plan, and you pass the second year. It's really if you fail the second year that you get to be, you know, one of the problems that John is talking about, that we really don't want to increase those. So that's what you should think about is, you know, you're transferring program income. Can you, you know, do what you did for NSP, accelerate and move it, get it, you know, under contract and ideally, you know, expended or near expended before you hit your second year's test after you move it in CDBG. And the best way to do that is to have a plan. When you make the request, you know, think about it as a manager. How would you deal with a big chunk of money coming to CDBG, and maybe you have a project that's been waiting in the wings or there's something, but you need to not just transfer it and then try to decide what to do. Think it through.
Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so a little bit more on amendments. So, you know, right out of the regulations at 91-505, if there's a change in the purpose, scope, location, or beneficiaries of an activity, or if it's a new activity, then that triggers an amendment. And if you think about scope or location or beneficiaries, it seems kind of likely that your NSP funds could trigger that unless it's kind of a nominal amount. So time those to transfer with the action plan cycle, and then you could do the amendment right as part of that. And then coming in at the beginning of your program year also gives you more time before we start measuring the timeliness. And as Josie said, you know, you can fail that test once, and we send you a warning. It's only when you fail it twice in a row that you have to have an informal consultation and justify your holding on to the money. Okay, next slide. Now for subrecipients, if the subrecipient agreement allows the subrecipient to retain program income and use it for NSP-eligible activities, then the transfer of the program income to CDBG will also require an amendment to the terms of the subrecipient agreement. So here this is subrecipients that are CDBG grantees. So it could be a state subrecipient, could be a member of a consortium, an NSP2 consortium. So not only will you have to get approval for the transfer, but you have to make sure that the subrecipient agreement allows this. So you can modify these subrecipient agreements. You know, these things were written in a time when we didn't anticipate the transfer of funds out of the NSP program. So this depends on your relationship with your grantee, but those things are possible, but they have to be congruent with your agreement. Next. All right, so let's sort of changing gears here. We're going to talk about, well, who can transfer program income. So we'll take you through a couple of charts. These are some kind of background ideas. So since most NSP grantees are state or entitlement CDBG grantees, they can transfer NSP program income to their own CDBG programs, no questions asked. And that is probably what, all but 50 or 60 or maybe 100 out of the 600 grants that we have. In the NSP2 process, we had direct application by nonprofits and consortia of nonprofits and entitlement communities. And so these get a little confusing, and we'll try to untangle that for you. And then when we got to NSP3, the legislation, the Dodd-Frank Act, actually gave direct NSP grants to 30 cities who were not direct entitlement communities, cities and counties, mostly in Florida, Michigan, and California. And then the new rules also have implications for state subgrantees. So let's go to the chart and see how this stacks up. So as we said, if you're a state or an entitlement city or an urban county, you can transfer funds from your NSP program to your CDBG program at any time. You need to get permission from the field office, and we're going to take you through what that entails, but there's no question that you can do it. Now, this group of NSP3 grantees that I just mentioned, there's 30 non-entitlement NSP3 grantees. They can retain the program income for NSP uses, or if they have an open grant with their state CDBG program, they can transfer it to that open grant. If they don't have an open grant, if they had one in the past and they plan to have one in the future, they don't have one now, then they are they're going to have to continue to use it as the NSP funding. I guess if they get one in the future, they could transfer it at that point if there's still some left. But it's got to be a live grant. So, basically the principle here is we're looking for a live connection to an entitlement NSP or an entitlement CDBG program or a state program. So we had some sole applicants that are nonprofits in NSP2, some pretty large grants. They have no entitlement connection, and so they cannot transfer program income. However, they're kind of working under different rules, and these were set out in the program closeout notice a couple of years ago. What happens is that if you think of it as there's sort of like three periods of time. There's the period before they close out. If any program income that they earn in the period before they close out is treated just like it was if they hadn't closed out. It's still all full NSP rules and everything. And then there's another period that starts the day they close out and runs for 5 years. And any program income that they receive during that period of time must only meet a national objective and be an eligible activity. It doesn't have to follow all the other rules. After that 5-year period, if you still have program income coming into the program that you're still receiving it after 5 years, then that money is called miscellaneous revenue. And that is basically exactly what it sounds like. You can use that for anything that you want. This comes right out of an OMB rule about nonprofits. And so, I don't know how much of that money is going to survive that long. It'll be interesting to see. But there are those 3 periods, up to the point of closeout to 5 years, and after 5 years, and they have slightly different rules for each period. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a fun one. Mixed public nonprofit NSP2 consortia, including consortia with entitlement and urban county grantees. And there was probably, so these are driven by the consortium funding agreement. So you have basically 2 choices, that your lead member is either an entitlement or not. And if they are an entitlement, they can transfer their own program income to themselves, and anything else is subject to the agreement of the parties in the consortium funding agreement as amended. If the lead member is a nonprofit, transfers are allowed if permitted by the agreement, which may be amended. So that's from entitlement communities to CDBG grants, though. So again, no money is going to be flowing from nonprofits to entitlements or states. And then finally, transfers from nonprofit members are not allowed, and these follow the rules above for the nonprofit NSP2 sole applicants. And I know that we have some all nonprofit consortia, and they're going to fall into that category as well, the 0 to 5 and the 5 and after, like Lake Worth. Hi, Joe. So next slide, please. All right. So this has probably generated more questions, and it's not as complicated as you might think, but state subrecipients, they are typically the states fund through a method of distribution units of general local governments, UGLOs, that we call them, and they have a relationship with them, and they specify whether they're allowed to keep program income from their CDBG program or not. And most of their NSP agreements, I think, kind of follow those terms. So if the subrecipient agreement says you can keep the program income, then you can keep the program income. If
the subrecipient agreement says they have to go back to the state, then the state is in the situation of being able to decide what to do with it.
Right. So, and if you have an active CDBG grant from the state,
if you're a subrecipient.
If you're a subrecipient, right. So this would be through the state CDBG program, like those NSP-3 ones that we talked about. Then you could transfer that money to the community CDBG program as well.
But you have a double permission problem. You have to get permission from the state, and the state has to get permission from HUD. So it's just a question of, we assume if the state asks us that they're willing to give you permission, and this is another kind of bulk ask that we have anticipated could possibly be a bulk ask that we're going to have to work that out. But if it's just program income on hand and you'd like to transfer it to your existing CDBG grant program and you're a small city and non-entitlement, or an entitlement, but you got the money from the state, you're going to have to go to the state first stop.
Yeah, and NSPs, a number of states looked around and found that their areas of greatest need were in entitlement communities and made grants to entitlements, sometimes with trepidation.
Yeah.
I know for sure that some of them were not too confident about that, but I think those probably worked out all right. But now those entitlement communities are subgrantees of the state, so they can't just do what they want to do. They have to get the state's permission to transfer that money back to their own CDBG program if they so desire.
Right, and so for states who took advantage of the waiver to act directly, and you are running your own entitlement-style revolving loan fund, you are not going to be able to transfer that revolving loan fund as a revolving loan fund to CDBG because it was a statutory waiver, and you're going to have to, if you want to transfer that program income in the revolving fund to the CDBG program, you're going to have to disband the revolving fund and move it to the CDBG program because revolving funds in regular CDBG, state CDBG, operate differently than the ones that are operating under that waiver that allows direct funding of projects in NSP. So that's something that if you're a state and you want to do something like that, or really if you're a state and you want to transfer program income, and it's going to involve altering subrecipient agreements or something, please, please, please come talk to your field office or send in a note to NSP questions outlining the case so that we can walk through it with you. We think they're going to be very, very doable, but we want to make sure we document the steps for these things. They're relying on waivers that people are going to lose sight of in a couple more years when the program closes out.
Well, we're curious how many revolving loan funds there are out there, actually. So I'm betting not too many. So. Yeah,
I think that a lot of people have been running them down and closing them down, but we'll see.
So here's an interesting question. I mean, since you can't capitalize a revolving loan fund from grant funds, only from program income, and if you have to shut it down in NSP and move it over to CDBG, couldn't you just start it back up over there?
You could, but it would have different rules.
Right.
Because you would have to be making grants to local government or loan. No, I think it has to be grants. The method of distribution would be covered under the regular state CDBG method of distribution. You would amend that to create the revolving fund. And then it is possible, but there are two kinds of RLFs available in NSP and only one in state CDBG. And all the state ones that I had looked at during the course of NSP were taking advantage of the waiver. So if there's one out there where you think it's compatible, again, talk to us. We may agree with you. Who knows? Crazier things have happened.
Yeah.
We like agreeing with you.
All right. We like craziness.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Great. Okay. So at this point.
So for this section, I think we're going to turn it over to Ebony, and she's going to give us just a general recap of the program income transfer procedures. After that, we will talk specifically about the request template, and just so everybody has a quick little view at what that looks like. It is part of the program income procedures that are on the HUD Resource Exchange. You can find this in the file. But just to take a quick look at it here on the screen, you'll see that there's a number of blanks and attachments that need to be completed before you can send this template in to make your request. And we're going to be walking through each of these blanks and attachments to give you more detail on what it is exactly that you need to complete so that you can get your request approved most efficiently. So go ahead, Ebony.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer, and good afternoon, everybody. As you all probably know or may not know, we released the procedures, the actual steps to transferring program income, and these procedures go through how you're going to actually transfer program income from the DRGR system, how you're going to reconcile your program income, how you're actually going to be requesting the transfers from the field office, and this also involves canceling DRGR program income receipts. And then we move to sort of section 2, where we look at what you're going to be doing in the Integrated Disbursement Information System, IDIS. There we're going to be adding our receipts, we're going to be editing and viewing receipts, and we're going to view receipt accounts. What we're going to look at today, because we've covered in previous webinars in more detail, we've covered how to reconcile that program income, and we've actually covered the actual procedures in depth. So today we're going to be looking at number 2 here, which is how to request that transfer from the field office. Let's see here. Whoops. So let's see here. One of the things that we want to think about when we're requesting from the field office, one of the things we want to think about when we look at these procedures, and John and I talked about this before the webinar, we want to let you know that we put these procedures together and we can anticipate to some extent some scenarios, but there are some things here that may come up as you're actually going through this request. So we put these together, and you can anticipate certain things, but everything may not be encompassed here. We also want to let you know that we developed these procedures with the idea of streamlining the whole process. So the idea behind these procedures is to make this as simple and painless and as straightforward as possible. So that being said, Jennifer, we can move to that next slide if we have not already. Looks like we have. Okay.
Yep.
So requesting the transfer from the field office, there are a couple of things that are going to happen up front. You are going to reconcile your program income in DRGR. Then here's where we come to the piece that we're really going to look at in depth. And all of these slides from here on out actually cover what's in that one slide that Jennifer showed you up front, which is page 18 of the grantee procedures. So what we want to focus on here is the written request. What are we going to include in that written request, and what that written request essentially addresses? One, you can only request to transfer program income that is on hand. So this one request will be submitted for the program income that you have on hand only. Future program income will need a separate approval if the grantee wants to transfer it to CDBG. So if you anticipate receiving program income over a period of future 3 months, then you will need to submit a request for that future program income. It has to be on hand in order to transfer it. After you have requested your program income, and after you've received approval from HUD, you will transfer that program income immediately after you receive approval. So that will happen right away, and we want to emphasize that. And this is so that the program office can track it, and so that you can also track it.
And I want to break in here, again, on the sort of developing policy front. If your transfer is approved, but you have not received it yet on the CDBG side, know that we will be keeping track of the approval letters and considering the approval to be the point at which we will start considering that program income CDBG for purposes of looking at timeliness. Yes. And we know you can't control the time when HUD approves it, so we're committing to do those approvals as speedily, as swiftly as we can. But just keep that in mind, that it's CDBG as soon as you request and we approve.
Right.
But you need to get it receipted, because then you don't need to have a draw go through between when your request is approved and when you receive it, because you're supposed to use program income first.
Right.
So we're not trying to set up an audit gauntlet or anything. It's just a consideration of doing everything with all deliberate speed.
There you go. So thanks for that, Jessie. I want to take a little bit to move back here to that first bullet, which is after your program income is reconciled in DRGR. I think I mentioned this in the beginning of the presentation, but if you want more detailed information on how to actually go through the steps of reconciling your program income in DRGR, we have put together two webinars, one webinar that actually goes through the reports that lay out how to do that, how to reconcile your program income. And then we have another webinar which is, again, provides that bigger overview of, that larger overview of how to actually transfer program income. So we do have those two resources available for you.
And we are on the verge of having the DRGR office hours. I think they're just kind of working out the specific hours so that you will have some assistance there to help you through those complicated reconciliations.
They're actually active this week, John.
Pardon?
Yep, we've got some office hours going this week, so we're all set.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Great.
Well, then you'll have to tell us how it works.
Right. More to come on that front. So we can move to the next slide here, Jennifer. So here, again, these slides, what we're going to walk through are encompassed in 4 paragraphs. So what we want to see within these in this 4-paragraph letter is we want to see your grant number. You must identify the grant number from which you are drawing the program income from. We also want to see the specific appropriation. So here you want to identify NSP-1, NSP-2, or NSP-3. The letter actually includes, this letter template actually includes a line where you can identify whether or not you are a state, a city, or a county. So you're going to populate that particular line. You're also going to identify, and this is important here, the activity numbers associated with the NSP activities that generated the program income. And this bullet comes specifically from the program income notice. So we need to see that activity number that directly generated that program income. One of the ways that you can do that with relative ease is you can look at your financial report 5E, and that's going to list all of the activities that generated program income and the receipted amounts to determine which activities you can transfer program income from. This report, you can actually export this report and the activities from which PI will be transferred from, and you can copy those into Attachment A. Attachment A is actually an attachment that you are generating yourself. So that is Attachment A, and you will label that Attachment A, and there you will list out all those activities. And Jennifer, if you want to say a little more on that on the next slide, move there.
Sure. This is a screenshot of a sample financial report 5E, and as you can see here, it's going to list all of your activity numbers along with the receipt number, the receipt date, and the receipt amount. And this report, if you take a look at the overall program income transfer instructions as well as the webinar from July 19th, it gives you some more information about how to use this report specifically to identify those receipts that you may need to cancel or edit in some way so that you can reduce the amounts of NSP program income to transfer it to CDBG. So this report is going to be helpful to you in a number of ways. As I mentioned, you're going to use it so that you can figure out which receipts are going to be canceled or edited, so you'll need to pull it for that purpose. But if you pull it for that purpose, then you're going to have all your activities lined up right here. And what you can do then is whichever activities you're going to choose to transfer program income from, you're going to list those activities on your Attachment A. So this is a handy way to just pull those activities out once you've exported it into Excel. And in MicroStrategies, there's a simple way to just click on Export. You can either do it from the main page where all the reports are listed. You can click Export, or once you're within the report, you can go to the little icon at the top that looks like an Excel file, and you can export it there. You can also export it as a PDF, but I think Excel is probably the most useful.
So Jennifer, if you've got $1 million balance in your NSP program income, you just have to go through here and find, I mean, there's any combination of $1 million worth of receipts in program income is right. I mean, there's no sort of finer tune than that, is there?
No, not really. I think the instructions direct folks to more than likely just transfer the most recent PI receipts first.
Right.
Yep. So if you go through this list, you can even sort your receipts by date if you want to. That's the great thing about exporting the report. You can do a lot to manipulate it to get the information out of it that you want. You can do those manipulations within DRGR as well, but if you want to have it handy as a separate file, you can export it. But that's right. I think the guidance just says that you should try to reduce the most recent PI receipts first. And so that's exactly what you do. You'd look for your most recent receipts and then just keep tallying them up until you get to the $1 million that you'd like to transfer. And then you would identify which activities all those receipts came from, and then those activities would be listed on Attachment A.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, so then here, and again, as I mentioned earlier, these are all included in the letter, the template. You're going to identify the amount of available NSP program income that you have on hand. So that would be the amount of program income that you've receipted and drawn in DRGR and the remaining DRGR program income balance. So you're going to identify those two pieces. Here, one of the, and let me actually clarify here. So here we're going through the amount of program income that you've receipted in DRGR. And a couple of slides down, we're going to tell you about program income that's not receipted in DRGR. Again, we're only covering this briefly. We have another webinar that goes more in depth into how to actually cover the details of these. So here you're going to be using Financial Report 5D, and we've actually asked for you to include a copy of this report as Attachment B. You're going to label it as Attachment B. We would like you to include that with your written request to the field office. This is going to show how much program income you actually have in DRGR. Okay, Jennifer, did you want to say anything, or is that pretty
no, so on this report, you can see that this report really is a cumulative snapshot of your different program income accounts. And so it can give you a higher level view than that Financial Report 5E, which is about your individual receipts. So 5D is going to give you the snapshot on your general account and let you know overall across your whole general program income account, this is how much you've received and dispersed and what's remaining. So that gives you a really good indication of how much PI you have on hand that's available to transfer. And so this is maybe even the first place you want to start in pulling reports, because this will give you a sense of how much you've got there that can be transferred. And then you can look at 5E and start to pick out the receipts that would total up. For instance, in this example, if you were transferring the whole general account balance, it would be $410,000 and some odd change there.
Okay, so we can move to the next slide. So again, you're going to indicate how much you're requesting to transfer and then how much will actually be remaining in DRGR following the transfer. You're also going to be indicating the date that you're requesting the transfer. And again, these fields are all in the actual request template. And I think we can move to the next slide here. So here, as I mentioned earlier, here is where we're going to be mentioning, we're going to request the amount of program income that has not been receipted in DRGR. You're going to be using your internal records to confirm here. Here's where you want to be talking to your financial folks. You want to be looking at what you use to actually record your internal tracking records using either your general ledgers or using whatever system you have to record, to track your financial records. You're going to indicate those in the request. So the amount, you may not have any program income that has not been receipted in DRGR. So you weren't necessarily required to receipt program income in DRGR.
Once you made the decision to, you do have to receive program income in DRGR, but you're not required, once you've made the decision to apply for a transfer, once we got out there and said you could transfer. From that point until you actually get the transfer accomplished, you can hold the money, but only for that brief period. Otherwise, of course, you have to receipt your program income in accordance with the regulations and all. We just didn't want to make it harder for you to be unreceipting stuff that you already knew you were going to transfer.
Okay. So just as in the case where you're actually going to be transferring program income that you've receipted in a DRGR, in this instance, you are also going to be documenting the amount that one that you have not receipted and one that's going to be remaining following the transfer. You are going to include this information as attachment C. So here you could potentially have attachment B and attachment C, or you could just have one or the other.
You told me it was 4 paragraphs.
Broken up into little tiny bits and pieces. Okay, attachments, yes.
She wants the math to work.
That's right. We're hoping this all works.
She has all the individual things between the plus and minus signs, and then it comes out equal. That's the rule.
There you go. Okay, so here we're going to be looking at our program income reconciliation records. We're going back to that. And we are going to confirm in the template what you're saying here is that you have reconciled your internal accounting records with any program income on hand that is not recorded in DRGR. So, and Jennifer's going to go through some of the reports here, but what we're talking about is the attachment D, and all that we want to know here, and think of this as a conversation with your CPD representative. And what we've asked the CPD representative is to go through and look at each one of these line items. So you want to make them as clear as possible. So here we've given you some reports. Jennifer's going to go through those. But in this attachment D, what we want to see here is that you've gone through and you've reconciled your records and you know how much program income you have on hand and how much you've recorded in DRGR and how much you've identified in this particular request. Jennifer, did you want to add a little bit about that financial report 7B? I think we talked about 5E.
Yeah. So 2 reports that are going to be helpful to you when you're trying to reconcile your program income would be these 2 reports here, financial reports 5E and 7B. 5E we talked a little bit about a few minutes ago. This is a report that lists out each and every program income receipt by activity. So you're going to need that for a number of reasons. So that's helpful because you can compare it receipt by receipt to your internal records. But if you want a sort of higher level snapshot about the financial aspects of each activity, you can pull financial report 7B. And this is a gem of a report. Everybody who works in DRGR loves this because it breaks out each and every activity. It provides you with the budget for that activity, the obligated amount, the grant funds that have been drawn, the program income that's been drawn, the program income that's been receipted, and then also the amount of expenditures that you've reported in your 2PR. So it gives you a really nice picture of everything related to the finances of that activity. And so what you want to do is take this financial report 7B and make sure that it reconciles with your internal records for that activity. So have you receipted all the program income that you have on your books? Does it show up on financial report 7B as program income receipted for that activity? And, you know, there are other aspects of reconciling on this report, like checking your expenditures and things like that against your draws. But for our purposes here today, we really want to make sure that what you've done is receipted all the program income that you have on your books for a given activity, making sure that you see it show up on financial report 7B under the PI receipted column. And then you can also check out to make sure your disbursements that have been noted in DRGR match your financial records as well. And then once you have all of that information reconciled, so your internal books match what's in DRGR, then you can take evidence from your internal system and these reports that you use to do the reconciliation and include them as attachment D. One note is that if you do find an issue with the amount receipted on report 7B, if you see that you have more PI on your books or less than what is shown in DRGR as receipted for that activity, then you could go into your individual PI receipts and use financial report 5E to try to figure out where that discrepancy lies. So that's why both of those reports are sort of helpful for this process. But I would say that starting with 7B is the right place. That'll allow you to make sure that everything you have on your books as PI earned has actually been receipted, except for that amount perhaps that you're withholding. As Jesse was saying, if you've decided that you're going to transfer PI and maybe you've been holding some back and not receipted it, that's fine. But you want to make sure that anything you think you receipted actually showed up in DRGR.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jennifer. So we can move to the next slide here. So this slide, again, going back to that, thinking about what your CPD representative is going to be looking for and what we've talked about in some of the other webinars and what we hopefully have given to you in a straightforward way in our FAQs. Here, what we're looking for is that LH25 requirement. We want to see that you have demonstrated that a minimum of 25% of program funds will benefit low and moderate income households of 50% of AMI. So this is what we're looking for here. And we also want to see that program income will be used for administrative, that no more than 10% of program funds and NSP program income will be used for administrative purposes. But I really want to highlight the first part of this bullet because we've got a section in our FAQs that's going to help you go through the steps to actually looking at whether or not you've either met this requirement or that you will meet this requirement. So we want to see that you've given some thought to that you've met it or you will meet it. It's not required that you meet it at the time, but we do want to see that you've actually given some thought and some analysis to whether or not you've met it or will meet it. Questions 10, 11, and 12 in our July 11th FAQs go through these steps very simply and straightforward. So we can move to the next. Oh, actually, we can go back. Thanks, John. We can go back to that slide. So compliance with the LH25 set-aside and the administrative cap, this should be performed after you subtracted the NSP program income that is proposed to transfer to the program. And we'll let Jessie is very good at explaining this.
Yeah, basically you start with your balances of all of these sub-accounts. You do the reason the slide about identifying the program income comes before, the two slides come before this, is take the program income that you propose to transfer, the amounts are made of the amount you've receipted in DRGR and the amount that you haven't, and subtract that from your NSP program as a whole. Right. The funds you spent and the funds that you still have programmed and have not yet expended that you're going to leave in NSP. Then, once you've done the subtraction, go look at the NSP program that remains and see if it's compliant with the 25% or will be compliant with the 25% when you finish whatever projects are underway. And you check to see whether you will be compliant with the NSP admin cap on that balance of the program that stays in NSP. If it will, then you can make the request to the field office, and if it won't, or if it's actively in question, you're cutting it really close or something, then you might need to have a chat with your field office about what your options are. But we will not approve a transfer if, when we look at that, you will fail the 25% set aside, and we probably won't if we will fail the admin cap.
Right.
There's one other category of funds that won't be subject to transfer, and that is NSP program income that's been obligated. So you may have some projects underway. Those are considered part of your program that stays NSP, and they'll be measured. You'll be measuring those for the 25% set aside too. But so this is what we talked about earlier, was to say these funds become CDBG funds. They don't have to carry the NSP requirements and the CDBG requirements. Once you take them out of NSP, then they just meet CDBG requirements.
Right.
Right. And once you've, and we kind of mentioned this earlier, but once you have transferred those funds into IDIS, then you must draw that program income before you can draw from your line of credit in IDIS. So that's another piece that's actually going to help you to remember that you need to that you need to draw funds, those funds, as promptly as possible once they've been receipted into IDIS. So we are going to move here to the actual, this is again the LH25 piece, what we have, and I just quickly mention this. If you can provide additional documentation, what we've asked for in the request template is that you actually indicate to your rep that you perform this analysis, that you will or will not meet it. What you want to do is help your rep out as much as possible to be able to understand that you've done this analysis and that you either have or will meet this. So again, thinking of this document and thinking of this template as kind of something, a tool to help you tell the story to your rep. So Jennifer, we can move to that, to the next slide after this LH25. So once you receive field office review and approval, and we have put together a template for the field office, they will send you this template, and the template, this notification rather, will indicate that you've either been approved or that the request was not approved. So in the case that your request is approved, what you're going to do is you're going to scan and upload HUD's notification to the administrative activity area in the DRGR Action Plan module as documentation of approval. The reason why we've actually asked for this to be uploaded to the action plan is, one, we want to make it easy for you to be able to go back and find out when did you actually make a request, how much was requested, and it'll all be right there in that action plan. So you're going to choose the admin activity, and then you're going to go, and I think Jennifer has a screenshot here for us to actually see that. So you're going to go to the Edit Activity page 2. You're going to click Additional Documents, and Jennifer, we can move to the, so we can show that. So you're going to click Additional Documents, and there you're going to upload HUD's notification authorizing this transfer. Jennifer, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to the actual upload process here.
Sure, yeah. So when you go into your action plan, you know how you'll have your list of activities there in your action plan, you're going to choose the admin activity. And once you choose the admin activity, you know that it'll open onto the edit activity pages. So you're going to skip the first page and click continue to the second page. And once you get to the second page, at the very bottom of that second page, you're going to see this box that says supporting documents. And that's where you'll find that add additional documents link. And of course, you're going to have completed your location description and activity description fields here. They're blank just for so that we can show you what the screenshot looks like. But of course, yours will be fully populated and beautiful, right? And so once you click on Add Additional Documents, it's going to take you to another little pop-up that is going to look like this, where you can actually click Browse. Once you click Browse, it'll allow you to choose a file from your computer, and so you'll be uploading that approval that you received from HUD. Once you choose the file, you'll see it sort of working so that it's finally uploaded, and then once it's finally uploaded, that document name is going to show in this little gray box here, and then all you need to do is just save the activity, and then that documentation will be saved here. And just to note that this supporting documents feature works on any activity for any kind of documents that you'd like to preserve as a record of your action plan, and there's also the same feature in your QPR. But we're going to use it for this purpose to make sure that your approval from HUD for the PI transfer is properly attached to your action plan and documented here.
Okay, and a note here about uploading this document to your action plan. This is going to require that you open your action plan. So your action plan will be opened and it will go to the modified, status. So this is going to require that your CPD rep actually approve that action plan prior to being able to go in and approve your QPR. So please keep that in mind as you're actually making these requests and coordinate with your CPD rep. So we're going to move here to the next slide, which is our PI transfer. Again, this is, we want you to document in your QPR, one, HUD's approval that you received it, the date of the approval, the amount of program income that's approved for the transfer, and then again the actual activity numbers associated with the NSP activity that generated the program income. You're going to put this information in the overall narrative section of the QPR. So you've uploaded the approval and you've documented your QPR. Here we have a slide. I think this is one slide here that's going to provide some resources. Jennifer, if you wanted to cover some of these resources, we've got quite a few resources available, and this is just the start.
This is just letting you know that, reminding you again, and we said it a couple times, but once the program income transfer is approved, you should promptly transfer that program income to IDIS. And the following resources can be helpful to you in completing all the steps that are required, those steps that we talked about today, as well as any other steps required in actually canceling the receipts in DRGR or creating the receipts in IDIS. And so if you take a look at the program income and transfer instructions, they are at the HUD Resource Exchange at that link. That gives you step-by-step instructions. It includes screenshots for how you do the different DRGR and IDIS actions. And then we also had a webinar on July 19th that we mentioned before about all of the different steps, and we actually walked through those screenshots and talked about them in more detail. So if you're going to do the transfer, make sure you become familiar with those instructions, of course, but you can always go to that webinar for a little bit of extra help. All right, and with that, I think we've got some FAQs that we want to go over.
So let's see here. So, and we're going to leave time for more conversation FAQs, but here are some of the standard FAQs that we've developed, and you'll find more of these in the previous webinars, as we've mentioned. But will HUD approval be needed each time NSP program is receipted into IDIS, or will one approval cover all future transfers? So the approval will cover the PI that is on hand at the time of the transfer request only. So you will request, and it will only be for that program income that you've got on hand, either receipted in DRGR or in your local program accounts. So we're working on, and Jesse's been helping out here, but we're working on identifying how we can allow grantees to make a request for future streams of program income so that you don't need to go through this process each time.
Right, and it's going to be a fairly easy change for things like revolving funds where it's a financial transaction, but it is very clear now when we've been asked this question sort of in this context that you will not be able to transfer land purchased with NSP into the CDBG program. This is only going to be about cash resources one way or another. So if you bought a piece of land with NSP funds, you need to meet the NSP requirements for the use of that land. And then if you then sell it, then the program income you get back, if you've met all the NSP requirements with the use of the land, the program income you get back, you could then apply to transfer to CDBG. But there are different statutory and regulatory provisions that talk about land and cash resources, and so we're dancing through that last little hoop, and we do mean to allow, like if you have loans that you're going to get payment on, one of the questions was, we'll be getting payments on a loan for the next 15 years. Can we just say, identify the payments we expect and ask for approval for that? Right now you cannot, but we do want to alter the notice to allow that identification at the time, and we're working on that.
I got a related question. So if I've got NSP1 and NSP3 program income that I want to transfer, do I need a separate transaction for each one of those?
You can put them both in one request, but you would have to identify for each grant separately, because the field office is going to have to look at each grant and see the funds from that grant or the program income assigned to that grant moving. But there's no reason they can't go into a single request if you have program income on hand for more than one NSP round. And just make sure you identify the grants and the program income that attaches to each grant.
Exactly. Okay.
Well, so we've talked a little bit about this. We'll HUD waive or extend deadlines for meeting the 1.5 ratio because of the influx of NSP program income. And we technically can't waive that, but we will work with you. And in fact, we've got language in there that this second word that says HUD can take into account in the original draft. Now it says HUD will take into account because we're putting that into a document that gives us a little flexibility there. But the bottom line is we want to see you be able to move that money in the next couple of years. And so the more convincing you can be, the more likely we are to approve a large transfer. Right. And the other thing to think about is that for a few of you, you also are CDBG disaster recovery grantees, and CDBG DR also has that same waiver that allows transfer to the CDBG program in order to meet expenditure deadlines. For the most recent appropriations have that waiver. And we will be allowing, those grants usually dwarf the regular program, so we'll have the same consideration. What we're basically saying is the amounts may get looked at or will get looked at in the timeliness test, but when we consider the corrective actions, we're going to take a different view if it was the result of an NSP transfer, at least for the first year, and we just want to see how you're going to accelerate and that you have a plan to accelerate to get through that as the additional funding. It's a really tough problem to have more CDBG money. I mean, you know, a lot of people wish they were in your shoes.
Okay. So, do I need to enter addresses supporting information for all addresses in DRGR? Yes. You should enter all of these. All addresses should have, at a minimum, a start and end date of affordability periods. So you're going to want to go back, if you haven't already recorded that information in one place, and look at the start and end dates for your affordability periods for all of your agreements or properties, however you've documented that information.
It wouldn't be NSP if we didn't have an exception.
Okay.
NSP 1 didn't have to use properties for housing.
Mm-hmm.
So if they use that property for something besides housing, of course, there's not a continued affordability piece. So this is for all properties that have a continued affordability period that applies to them. And for NSP 2 and 3 grantees, just tune this out, go la, 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 because everything you're doing has housing, right?
And, you know, this is thanks for that, Jessie, and this is a great step to go through in terms of looking at approaching closeout. If you have not gathered and collected this information and have it in one place, this is a part of moving you towards that cleanup and closeout, is actually putting all this information in one place.
And there's a template for getting all your addresses in to your QPRs, so no excuses. And the system will check and make sure we can map them.
Okay, so we're moving on to the next slide here. So after closeout, what must a grantee update over time with respect to the affordability information in DRGR? So here, what we want to see is that you're reporting on each property annually after closeout, and you can find this one in the closeout guide as well as the closeout notice. You're going to find what we're looking for here. So you're reporting annually. The updates on the information will include the affordability period for the property, for this property is complete. So the home is sold and X amount is recaptured. So that's just kind of an example there.
Yeah, these are possibilities for what you're going to tell us. It's going to be short and sweet, in other words.
Right.
Until you're out of the affordability period, and then the reporting requirement will fall away and gradually you will no longer have any properties you're talking to us about. The longest things, I think, right now we think the longest things are going to be the land banks because their 10-year period starts at grant closeout with the date of the closeout agreement. And NSP is old enough now, I think we're not going to have too many things that run longer than that, except possibly in California where I heard that they fastened some 50-year, and we may write ourselves out of that at some point, but we haven't done that yet.
And we do plan on having a webinar that's going to look at this, and it's kind of a life after closeout, so it's going to go into what these scenarios could look like, and then go into some of the land bank questions that we've had come up. So look for that on the horizon. We can move. So we took a look at this question, and we went to look at the information that needs to be provided on land bank properties at the time of closeout, including the information that you need to put in DRGR. And so here we went to our NSP closeout guide, and we saw that there's 3 pieces. These are the main 3 pieces, and there's, in some cases, little sub requirements under each one of these. But the big pieces are that you're going to list all of the properties in the land bank. You're going to include the address. You're going to describe the property. You're going to define the specific use for each property, for which each property is intended to be obligated. And then you're going to project out a time for disposition, a time for selling that property, or the actual plan for that property. And here you can go to page 31 of the NSP guide, closeout guide. We're actually, just to let folks know that we're putting together some other questions related to land banks. We haven't had as many of these questions come up, but here are some that have come up. We've been asked if land bank properties can be transferred to IDIS following NSP closeout. And I think Jesse mentioned this earlier. No, they stay a part of NSP until they are disposed of. So you cannot move land bank properties to IDIS following closeout. In fact, and John knows, John has information about this, but under CDBG, you are not land banking properties.
Right.
Okay. So, Jennifer, if you wanted to take us through some of our resources that we put together here.
Sure. Before we hop into the Q&A, and we've got quite a few questions that have come in already, we want to give you some resources that you can look to as you're thinking about program income transfers and closeouts and NSP generally. So as we mentioned before, there is a general list of there's a list of program income transfer FAQs, but there are also many NSP-related FAQs that are available on the HUD Resource Exchange. And so if you go to the HUD Resource Exchange, to this link here, you can search for all kinds of things you might be thinking about related to NSP and see if there's already an answer out there for you on the website. In addition to that, we're reposting here this link to the PI transfer instructions. Again, it's really important that if you're interested in doing the transfer, you review these instructions carefully, because it's going to give you the step-by-step instructions for what you need to do in DRGR as well as IDIS in order to complete your transfer. We've got many general NSP resources on the HUD Resource Exchange. So you can go there to pull up all kinds of information that's been put out over time about NSP. Specifically, if you're looking for closeout guidance, there's a whole page on closeout guidance that includes the closeout notice as well as the closeout guidance that kind of walks you through in a more user-friendly way all the different pieces of closeout. Now, this closeout guide, one thing to note there is that this was written before the program income transfers were approved, obviously, and so it's not going to contemplate at this time the program income transfer option. Other than that, the closeout guide is still applicable. It will be updated to better explain this option to do program income transfers, but as of right now, it's not in there, so just keep that in mind. There is a wealth of NSP webinars. John, how many webinars did you guys do back in the day? Yeah. Many, hundreds, I think. So there's lots and lots of webinars. If there's a question that you're itching to have an answer to, there's probably a webinar about it. So you can check out all the webinars there, including the most recent webinars that we've been doing related to closeout and program income transfers. So since the program income transfers is very closely tied to DRGR and IDIS, we want to give you some resources for these systems as well. There is a specific DRGR section of the FAQs. If you go in and to this link here, you'll see very specific FAQs about DRGR. In addition, within DRGR, if you're actually in the system, the bottom left-hand menu, there's a link that says FAQ, and you can click on that link and go right to the FAQs from there as well. There's also a really wonderful, updated, beautiful-looking user manual for DRGR, brand new for 2016. So this is going to give you step-by-step guidance for all the different functions that need to be completed in DRGR, and it's broken out by module, or you can download the entire thing, which I think is something like 300 pages, but it's a wonderful resource. And then we have here the link for the IDIS training manual as well for CDBG entitlement communities. And so if you're looking to get some more guidance on how you receipt PI into IDIS once you've gotten the approval for your transfer, then you can go into the IDIS guide here and get some help there. As I mentioned, in the transfer instructions, there are step-by-step screens, and there's also a walkthrough in that July 19th webinar for that receipting process. And if you still haven't been able to find your answer after all of those resources, there is the Ask a Question feature on the Resource Exchange. There are pools for NSP policy questions and then specifically for DRGR and IDIS. So if you have a question that you can't find an answer to, you can go ahead to this link and submit your question, and an expert will answer it within a few days. It's always helpful if you're working on a DRGR or IDIS question to include some screenshots so that whoever receives your question has a better sense of how they can help you troubleshoot. There's also the NSP questions mailbox, and this mailbox will allow you to send a question directly to the folks there, our hosts today, and they'll be able to get you an answer quickly to any NSP-related questions, particularly those related to closeout here and NSP or program income transfers. And if you're really stuck and you feel like you need some one-on-one technical assistance, you can request TA through the Get Assistance link on the HUD Resource Exchange. Just describe what your needs are, and it'll be submitted, and then it'll be reviewed and possibly approved for direct technical assistance with a TA provider. And with that, we will move on to getting some of your questions answered. We've got a bunch of questions that have come in already. One question asks, is it known at this time whether the program income transferred will be set up as a separate funding line in IDIS, similar to how CDBGR was done? This would assist the grantees in tracking the 1.5 deadline for expenditures.
I don't think it will. It just becomes part of the CDBG program income. It's not a separate line in the CDBG accounts.
Once it's receipted, it'll just go into the pool of receipted CDBG program income and have no differentiating markers whatsoever. So your local accounts need to have a journal entry or whatever you use to do a transfer locally so you'll reconcile.
Great, thank you. Question asks, once HUD approves the transfer of program income, can the program income sit in NSP until we are ready to transfer and spend it in CDBG?
No. If HUD approves it, you need to move with all due speed to do the transfer into IDIS. Have a plan and know how you're going to handle getting it out of DRGR and into IDIS promptly after HUD sends you your letter.
Thank you.
You can't just sit there. That'll just confuse everybody.
Right. Indeed. Okay, this refers back to slides. So let me go back to this slide that's being requested. So this is related to the questions or the material we covered related to who can transfer program income, I believe. So here on slide 11. Slow down, there you go. The question is, for nonprofits with PI, it refers to NSP2 only. What about NSP1 or 3?
Well, I mean, the general principle is that if you're a nonprofit, you can't transfer it because you don't have a CDBG direct grant from us. So if you're a nonprofit in NSP1 or 3, you're a subrecipient to a unit of government that in most cases is an entitlement. city, county, or state. And chances are you're going to be able to either retain that program income for your use, or your grantee, who gave you the funds, is going to require it to be returned. But it won't ever become CDBG funds if it's in the control of the nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. For future PI For future PI transfer permissions, such as PI being received from an amortizing loan on a monthly basis for 20 years, can one request be made for all 20 years?
Not yet.
Right.
We're planning on that. It's going to take a small notice revision. Should be available in a couple of months, so we're on it. I mean, if Jessie had her way, we would have it now, but
I don't always get my way. It's really frustrating. The world is arranged that way.
Another question. As a state agency, we do not have a CDBG program. If we want our subs to be able to transfer their PI to their CDBG program, who is responsible for getting the approval for them? Would it be approval for each sub?
So I've seen some states that have more than one agency that administers CDBG and NSP. This doesn't quite sound like that, though.
No. I think this question's asking, so say a state has many subrecipients, and some of them are CDBG entitlements themselves,
right,
and the state wants them to be able to transfer it to their own programs. Would the state have to ask for the approval
yes,
on behalf of the sub?
Yes, the state is the grantee.
Okay.
So the state would ask.
And then, okay, great. So the state's the grantee, so the state asks for the approval, and do they need a separate approval for each sub, or do they make the approval, or separate request for each sub, or can they put it all in one request?
I don't know that we figured that out, but I can't imagine why we'd want to put them all together. It just sounds like trouble.
Okay.
But let us think about that some more. But I suspect it would be an individual request per entitlement city. Sorry.
Okay, great. Is there a way to see what receipts still have money left on them? In other words, if you receipted a number of receipts and they total $100,000, but only $95,000 has been dispersed, can you tell what receipt or receipts would have the $5,000?
No, I don't know. That's going to hurt your brain, isn't it?
Yes. That indeed would hurt your brain. And I think this is, part of the reason for just taking the more recent receipts is that it sort of avoids this. But I think that as long as you're not trying to transfer more than you've drawn in PI, you're going to be okay, because there'll be enough PI remaining to cover whatever draws had happened.
And picking the most recent receipts is consistent with generally accepted accounting principles because you are using program income as you draw, which means the older money is getting used as you go. So it's always going to be most likely that the most recent receipt is the one where the balance is. Just if you start doing the math and you add up from, you logged this in the first of the month and the second of the month and the third of the month, and then you had a draw on the fourth of the month, and then you logged another program income receipt on the sixth of the month, it's the sixth of the month one that's going to end up having the balance if you did that intervening draw. So it's like logical, but we don't have a tracking mechanism for each specific dollar in DRGR.
Yeah, you're looking at it in aggregate here, so
yeah.
So you don't have to figure out exactly where it's coming from, as long as you know you have $600,000 left, and then you just back into the number of receipts that you would take to get that, starting with the most recent. It doesn't matter. I mean, they don't have to match up to the exact, source of those funds.
And we've got they're really simple kind of examples in the procedures, a couple of different scenarios that we walk through that give you sort of the different combinations that you can have. So take a look at those procedures. And also the previous procedure webinar should help you. Great
question. So please confirm, if we have program income from both NSP-1 and NSP-2, can we transfer either or both to CDBG?
Well, so it must be an entitlement community, so you can transfer either or both. It's your choice.
Is there a minimum or maximum to the amount that can be transferred?
I'm not doing all the work for a dime. But no, we haven't named minimums or maximums. We will, if you're transferring a very large amount, you want to sit down and have a chat with your rep about, can you really do that and manage your CDBG timeliness in a reasonable way. You don't want to, but have that chat. You may decide to do a very large transfer anyway because there's a CDBG, reason that can, project that can use it up. But other than that, that's the only caveat we're really putting. But you don't transfer de minimis amounts, please, which are $25,000 and less. That's all you need to do to get to closeout.
Mm-hmm.
If you have less than $250,000 or so and you can't get another whole unit out of it, it doesn't make any sense in your market, and I know we have some markets like that, then, transfer that amount to CDBG. You can do a lot with that in CDBG.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. If you are a nonprofit lead grantee with entitlement consortium members, 1, are you responsible for transferring the PI for the entitlement members? And 2, once the PI is transferred, will the nonprofit no longer need to be involved?
You're not responsible for the transfer, but you must make the request. You have to look at your subrecipient agreements or consortium funding agreements to make sure that works. The entitlement would do the transfer. You need to follow up and make sure they did it, and you're going to have to do the work in DRGR. But once it's transferred,
you're off the hook.
You're off the hook.
Great. Let's see. Somebody asks, where do I find the template just mentioned that helps us get all the info in one place? And so you'll look to the PI transfer instructions that are on the HUD Resource Exchange, and the link was provided in the slides a number of times. That template is within the instructions. Is it page 18, Ebony? Is that right?
Right. It's the last page.
Okay, so let's see. I think that might be our last question. Let me just make sure we got everybody. It appears that all the questions have been answered. Oh, somebody asked when will the slides be available. The slides actually should be up on the Resource Exchange. On the notice that announced the webinar, there is a link that says click here and resources will be posted when available. When you click that link, it should take you to the page where the slides are posted. So go ahead and check that out. And with that, I think that's it. Those are all the questions we have for today.
Great.
All right. Well,
most of our audience stuck with us. Thank you, and we appreciate that. And we will be back with another webinar in September.
Yes. Next webinar is scheduled for September 13th, likely to cover NSP closeout topics. Just a reminder that once you close out of this webinar, you will have a survey link that pops up. We'd appreciate any feedback on the survey. We always like to hear what worked well and what we can improve upon. And with that, we'll wish you all a good day. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Bye, Jen.